That's I just always do this anytime I start. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Radically Loved Radio. I'm joined by a very special guest. This man is actually somebody that I really look up to, and I've studied him. I've studied him and his work um, at Mortem, and I am just so excited to have him on the show. Let's welcome Stephen Kotler to the show. Here's your clap track.
Thank you so much. It's good to be with you.
Um, so
I appreciate the clap track. My ego thanks you. My dogs thank you. I'm all
this
in.
is so good. I mean, so much of the work that you've done in, I mean, just forever. I mean, I definitely want to talk to you about peak performance, but one thing that really is coming to the forefront of my mind. We were just having this conversation, this whole idea of I don't know, rite of passage. Like, I come from this school of thought where we had to we didn't Google it, we had to earn it, right? And so I my background, how I grew up. Part of what continued to propel me forward was not necessarily the belief that I could do something, but I didn't want to prove people wrong. I just didn't want to prove them right. So that was my driving force. So many people around me were like, "Oh, you're just going to end up being a loser. You're going to end up in jail. You're going to end up, getting killed. You're going to end up ODing, all the things." And I was just determined to not prove them right. I didn't know what my future was going to hold. I just knew I didn't want that. And so um, I know that's kind of like an off color way to start a conversation, but I'm sure that you have.
No, I can absolutely relate. So, I wrote an essay not too long ago on small letter S spite as a motivator, not capital S spite as a motivator, but small, right? Capital S spite eats you alive, right? You end up Michael Jordan, basically, right? Like
Yes.
it
Yes.
drives you, you win everything, and then you hate everybody forever. And you'll get where you're wanting to go, but you
Uh,
won't like the person who arrives there as
right.
a general rule. So, but small s, like there's a fortune cookie out of her refrigerator that my wife loves for me, which is I get great pleasure from people proving people wrong.
Mm.
My sixth grade teacher told me I wouldn't live to see 30. I called her when I turned 30. Actually, I sent a postcard, and the language I used was not appropriate for this adult show we're having. But yeah, I was like, yeah, I'm 30, bitch. What now?
Totally.
I like, I take
Wow.
almost every. I mean, there's a version of my story. I never tell this version, but I wanted to be a writer from the time I was 2 or 3 years old. The first creative writing assignment we ever got in school, I was in second grade and I did it wrong. I was too creative. I got yanked into the hall. I got screamed at. When I was in high school, the first time I tried to publish a poem, almost every single person I know called the school because they were worried I was going to kill myself because they thought the poem was so dark. They tried to fail me my senior year. My senior project was 50 very punk rock anarchist poems. And I had this amazing teacher who had been my first creative writing teacher, who I asked to be my thesis advisor. And she turned out to be a fundamentalist Christian. And so that didn't quite work. And she tried to fail me because my poems offended her. And there was a bit of a First Amendment kerfuffle around that. And they threw me out of my undergraduate creative writing program at the University of Wisconsin because I was too disruptive and nobody knew what I was doing. Blah, I could go on and on and on. I will also tell you that every single successful person I've ever met has the exact story, right? This is
Wow.
this is what success looks like. Everybody has this story, one way or another. And I always like to point out to people when we talk about peak performance that I have never met a successful person, and I've spent my life studying people who have been, took the impossible, made it possible, right? In every domain you can imagine about, that's been my career, studying those moments in time and how did it happen. Every single person I've ever met who has done that they are running from something just as fast as they are running towards something. You need that double motivation.
Mm.
And the first group of people that I started studying action adventure sport athletes in the 1990s, who the 90s in action adventure sports is the great era of impossible. More never been done feats were done than ever before. They were being iterated upon. And, I had a front row seat to all this. And yes, it was amazing. It was astounding. But what was really astounding was that the action sport athletes I knew, this was a rowdy, irreverent, punk rock, fucked up group of people. Everybody I knew came from a broken home. Nobody had a good childhood. Nobody had any education. Nobody had any money. There was tons of high risk behavior. There was tons of drugs, tons of booze. And, normally you put those things together in a community and you get death and jail and all that stuff. And instead we got, let's reinvent what's possible for our species. That's where I started with this question of like, oh my God, if like these were people like me, they were just as messed up as I was. And I was like, oh my God, if they can do the impossible, okay, what might be possible for me? And I was lucky enough to come out of those communities and see a lot of that stuff up close. And it's really, it's very unlikely people who end up changing the world.
Yeah, that is so inspiring for me because obviously to me I resonate I resonate most with people like that, people that grew up like I did or people that have that same sort of outlook of yeah, I mean this is how are we going to, like you said, run towards something as much as we're running away from something. Do you think that's implicit for success as a whole? Is it too much of a generalization to say that?
So I do. I do. So this gets a little more complicated, but the short version is the best of the best that you learn to use fear as a compass. And what I mean by that is, and you don't start really in peak performance if you're sort of following your biology. There's a sequence, there's an order, and you don't really go directly head on at fear for a little while, right? That's a later thing because it's really demotivating, right? It's really hard. It's really difficult for all of us. And it's very demotivating to do it. And you lose a lot along the way.
Mhm.
So you have to wait for a while. But if you think about the human biology and peak performance in any given situation, you don't have a whole lot to work with. You have your focus. What are you going to pay attention to? What are you going to ignore? And you have the action, the thing you're going to do, right? You put focus and action together over and over and over again. You get a habit. Suddenly you can do the action without having to put your focus on it, right? That's
Mhm.
essentially the equation. And the action, if you're going bowling, it's still going to require you go bowling. There's not a whole lot of room there. Focus is your biggest lever. Fear gives you focus for free, right? When something scares you, you automatically pay attention to it. So I like to say that every peak performer I know uses fear as a compass. They find the thing like, where do I go next? Find something that scares the pants off me and go directly towards it. And one of the reasons is as long as you can manage your fear, and there are, gratitude, mindfulness, there's a bunch of practices that help you kind of manage anxiety and really work with anxiety. You have to have some skill here, otherwise you're going to get your butt kicked. But it's phenomenal. And I'll give you just a real world example from my own life. I've written a lot of books. Every book I write, there's a number of challenges in writing the book. There's the communication challenge, right? I got a bunch of ideas. I want to communicate them to the reader. There's the art craft challenge. I want to tell fun, compelling stories and do cool things with words and blah, blah. And then I've set myself what I call a fear challenge for every book. I'll give you a simple example. I wrote a book called Bold, which was really a book for entrepreneurs looking to significantly level up their game. And I co-wrote it with my friend Peter Diamandis, and it's a business book. It's a straight up business book. Now, I am an old school punk rocker, right? Like when I got out of high school, business was the enemy. I mean, right? We were interested in things like creativity and passion and purpose and social justice, right? Like in 1985, you bring that shit into a boardroom, they're going to laugh at you, right? Like, forget about it. When I first started speaking on Wall Street, which I've done a ton of at this point, I would always be like, are you sure? Like, do you know who I am? Are you me really? Like, you sure you're not making a mistake? And so I wanted every business book I'd ever read in my entire life to be, I'm going to use a technical term here, sucked. Sucked is the technical term. They're so fucking boring. They're so confusing. They like people, they write an introduction and they rewrite the introduction for 300 pages, right? They've got nothing to say. I wanted to write a business book that didn't suck. Literally, that was the fear challenge inside of that. And it scared me. I mean, it scared the pants off me. I was like, how are you going to do like cool storytelling inside business, how-to stuff that's applicable, blah, blah, blah. I don't know if I was successful or not. A lot of people love it and think it's one of their favorite business books. I sort of got there. I don't think I got all. I think I could do better is what I have to say on that one. But I've got one of those inside every one of my books. There's something that scared the shit out of me. Writing a book is a long ass project. It's a couple of years you're in there. And if you don't have that extra, you want all of the internal motivation you can get in any hard project, in any difficult project. You want as many motivators as you possibly can, pointing in the direction you want to go, because it's hard to go A to B.
Yeah, I love what you're saying. How do we discern though between the fear? Because I can see it becoming debilitating for people. Like, oh, I'm gonna do this thing that's scary. Like for me, writing my first book was scary as fuck. It's probably the scariest thing I've ever. Even now, like just thinking about it makes me want to throw up. Now, you know. So,
By the way,
oh,
that
yeah.
feeling, it never goes away.
Oh, don't say that.
Did Norman Mailer said every one of my books killed me just a little bit more. I know you're talking to a guy who's written 13 books, and I love writing books. I will take writing over pretty much almost anything other than skiing, hurling myself down mountains. Prior one, book writing two, and I'm talking over all the other pleasures that you're thinking about right now. Get your mind out of the gutter, young lady.
Well, but how do you? So every single time you write a book, you feel that fear.
Yeah. So I mean, you could name the book, and I could tell you what the fear challenge was in that book that I set for myself. And who knows if the fear is real or not, or imagined, right? Like, is the other thing. But
Right.
the thing I want to mention to people is work, like, and it even mentioned to you, like working with fear can be like, you want to start with basic motivational stuff, right? You want to line up a bunch of motivational stuff, then you want to deal with goals, then you want to start working on grit. And it's only after you've kind of started training a handful of grit skills that you want to start really working with fear, because you want that foundation. You lay that foundation in, you're going to kill it. You're going to truly succeed and just keep going, keep going, keep going. But you want that solid foundation. So I think everybody should, learn to work with fear and develop fear practice and everything else. But I don't think it's like, oh, I want to be a peak performer, let me jump in and confront my mortal terrors. And no, really,
Right.
it's like, even when we work with athletes, because athletes are the opposite, they will use risk as a focusing mechanism, and we have to back them off of that. And we, teach them a handful of other things to sort of drop them into the zone, so that they're already at performing at their best before they start taking risks. Because, and when we work with the military, the special forces, by the way, I'm talking about the Flow Research Collective, which is an organization I run where we study the neurobiology of peak human performance, what's going on in the brain and the body when we're performing at our best.
Yeah, what I want to talk about that because we're neuroscience geeks on this podcast. We've had so many people talk about neuroscience. We love it. And for me, I love the science behind especially peak performance. I want to ask you about the role that either mindfulness or visualization play in getting congruent with that flow state, that peak performance.
Okay, so let's start by defining flow a little bit, so people know what we're talking about, and I'll walk back to your mindfulness question, because it's a good question. So flow is defined as an optimal state of consciousness where we feel our best and perform our best. It refers more specifically to any of those moments of rapt attention, total absorption. It's so focused on the task at hand that everything else disappears. Sense of self diminishes, time slows down or speeds up, dilates, passes strangely, and throughout all aspects of performance, both mental and physical, go through the roof. So that's a flow state. The amplification you get in flow is massive. Motivation goes up, grit goes up, productivity goes up, creativity, learning, empathy, ecological awareness, and a handful of other things, all massively increase. Some of the numbers are 500% above baseline. So it's a huge, huge boost. So flow states have triggers, preconditions that lead to more flow. There are 22 known triggers. There are way frickin' more. We just haven't discovered them, but there are 22 that we know about. And roughly they all do the same thing. Flow follows focus. It only shows up when all of our attention is put on the right here, right now. So that's what the triggers do. To put it in neuroscientific terms, triggers work by doing one of three things. They either drive dopamine into our system, they drive norepinephrine into our system, or they lower cognitive load, or they do some combination. Two of those three things, or three out of these three things. Dopamine and norepinephrine are focusing chemicals. They do a lot of other performance enhancing things in the brain and the body. They feel good drugs, they're reward chemicals, but they really drive focus and attention. And cognitive load, that's all the crap you're trying to pay attention to at any one time. And if I lower cognitive load, I liberate all this extra energy that your brain can then repurpose to pay attention to the present moment. So the flow follows focus. The most important flow trigger, complete concentration on the task at hand. So back in the 1970s, back when nobody even knew a damn thing about mindfulness or meditation, the guru of attentional science, a guy named Michael Posner, is at the University of Oregon. He just retired, super nice guy. He pointed out, it's somewhere in the Cognitive Neuroscience of Attention, Volume 1, which is a book he wrote. But in a paper he wrote back in the 70s, he said, I think mindfulness, or meditation, it was his term then, will be great training for flow. And he was right. And we have since, so meditation is different than flow. Different things are happening in the brain. They're similar, but different. But mindfulness is great for training up flow. Different people privilege, to me, flow is the end result because it's an action state. It's very practical. You can use it in the real world. So I think of it that way. Also, it's not just the focus and attention. One of flow's other triggers is what's known as the challenge skills balance. This is the idea that we pay the most attention to the task at hand when the challenge of the task slightly exceeds our skill set. So you want to stretch, but not snap, right? Emotionally, this means it's sort of like not on, but near the midpoint between boredom, not enough stimulation here, I'm not paying any attention, and anxiety, whoa, way too much. So because of that, what do we really mean by challenge and skills? When you break it down, you see all kinds of things like optimism and confidence and cultural baggage and all kinds of stuff play a role, but emotional regulation plays a huge role, right? The amount of anxiety in your system, too much anxiety. So anxiety is interesting because it's norepinephrine predominantly. Norepinephrine is both anxiety and excitement. It's the same signal. In fact, a lot of mammals can't feel both at the same time. They flop between excitement and curiosity and anxiety. In fact, they did a very weird study with women over 40. This was about 10 years ago. So I'm giving you a generational thing. And they were looking at cognitive reframing. It's very easy to reframe anxiety into excitement because they're the same neurochemical, right? So they were teaching older women how to reframe anxiety as excitement. And the women literally, they started feeling the excitement and they didn't realize, they were like, oh my God, this is excitement. This whole time I thought this was anxiety. They literally, because they grew up in a culture that repressed women and they weren't allowed to be excited because women were really excitable, right? So don't do that, don't do that, don't feel that. And literally these women had gone through their entire life feeling excitement and thinking it was anxiety, which was shocking, just a weird, that wasn't even the point of this study, but it was just one of the things that sort of rolled out of it. I was like, wait a minute, this is fucking nuts. Okay. Wow. Like these women literally went through their life not feeling one of like life's coolest emotions because culture said you can't.
Yeah.
That's freaky, scary, weird, evil.
Yes.
Lots of other words like that.
Well, it's so interesting to me. Yeah. The difference between, the initial thought of peak performance, I think of a male athlete. Like that's the first thing that goes into my mind.
It's so peak performance is nothing more or nothing less than getting our biology to work for us rather than against us. So for starters, flow is the state of consciousness that evolution created for everybody to perform at the best. Everybody can get into flow. right? Men, women, children, the age, the old, right? It is a universal. It shows up in anyone, anywhere, provided certain initial conditions are met. And if you look at the like original flow studies, like they went everywhere. They started out talking to experts and like Wall Street stockbrokers and neurosurgeons and dancers and rock climbers. But then they like Navajo sheep herders and Italian grape farmers and Japanese teenage motorcycle gang members and elderly Korean women farm workers and Detroit assembly line workers and Chicago assembly meat packers. I mean, like everybody. I would say if you can get into flow working at an assembly line in Detroit, you can probably get into flow anywhere.
Yeah. No, that's so true. It's a really like makes me happy. I'm like, that's a hopeful
It's
place
a
to.
universal. And the other thing is, if you look at there is some physical stuff in peak performance. There is, right? And there are some male female differences in the brain. They're not they're more peculiar than most people think, and they're really interesting in sort of cool and interesting ways. And we've been doing a bunch of study on the sex differences in flow between men and women, and it's still early days, and we don't really know what we're looking at. So I'm not going to talk about it, but it doesn't appear to be too great. But peak performance is available to everybody. That's the whole point of the new book that I just put out, The Art of Impossible, is literally, it's lessons learned from people who've done capital I Impossible. It's applicable by anyone interested in tackling, high hard challenges in their life. And the other thing is, we're built to take on these kinds of, we're built to rise to our full potential. Like the system is designed to work in a certain order. It's designed for us to rise to our full potential. And the way I like to explain it, though we'll have to go into a little more detail for me to explain this to you, that we're built to go big, and not using the system the way it was designed to be used, not going big, is bad for us. As Abraham Maslow, the famous psychologist, said the same thing 50 years ago better, which he said that whatever a person can be, they must be. And here's what I mean by it. So now I said we have to start the peak performance training with your biology, and your biology starts with motivation. And really, so motivation is sort of a catch-all term for a lot of things. It starts, if you're interested in peak performance, you have to start with extrinsic motivation, things outside yourself. You have to be able to pay your bills and have a little left over, right? You don't need crazy money at all. But if you're interested in peak performance because of the anxiety, if you can't take care of yourself, can't pay your bills, can't pay your rent, take care of your family, there's too much anxiety, you're freaked out, you're screwed. You just like, it's the way it works. And I wish there was a better way around it, but that seems to be very true. Once that's taken care of, and this is not to say that like once you get to that level of I can pay my bills and have a little left over for fun, you're going to stop wanting the money, the car, the clothes, the whatever. You'll still want those things. But if you're interested in driving performance, like productivity, learning, creativity, all that stuff, you want to move to intrinsic motivators, internal motivators. And there are 5 big ones, and they're designed to work in a sequence and an order. Curiosity is the most basic intrinsic driver. It's designed to be built into passion. What we call passion is nothing more than sort of like the intersection of multiple curiosities, right? You just sort of got to live there for a little while and let it grow. It grows into passion. There's a specific way to do it. Passion, once you have passion, if you can attach your passion to a cause outside yourself, right? So the thing you're passionate about also helps others in the world. Now you have purpose. Purpose is an even bigger motivator. Once you have purpose, what does the system want next? This is so obvious. It wants autonomy. Freedom, the freedom to pursue your purpose. I know what I'm doing in this world. Okay, now I want to go do it. And once you have autonomy, the system demands mastery, the skills to pursue your purpose well. If you get all of those things right, curiosity, passion, purpose, autonomy, mastery, those are all flow triggers. We pay attention to things we're passionate about automatically. We pay attention to things we're curious about automatically, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so that's all background to go back to where we started, which is not going big is bad for us, because it's such a cool, interesting, important point that everybody needs to understand, I think. And I rarely say things like everybody needs to understand. I really don't. I'm not that pretentious, but this one I think actually matters, and here's why. Anxiety and depression are at epidemic levels. We all know this, right? We know that 1
Yes.
out of 10 adults is going to get
Hmm.
diagnosed over the course of the next year, need meds. We know that it's the number one drain on public health dollars. And we know that somebody kills themselves once every 12 seconds. So we freaking suck at it, right? We're bad at this stuff. Well, there are 8 major known, well-established causes of anxiety and depression. 2 of them get all the attention. These are trauma and genetics, right? Genetics is my genes are wrong. I can't make enough serotonin. I can't be happy. I'm a miserable son of a bitch. And trauma is this terrible bad thing happened to me. I can't get over it, right? I'm
Hmm.
stuck. And it turns out, if you look at the data, both are lies. The vast majority of the time, genetics, in fact, almost always, genetics is only 50% of the equation. It can never produce either anxiety or depression. It's always genetics plus life's choices. Trauma, the vast majority of the time, leads not to post-traumatic stress disorder, it leads to post-traumatic growth. This is that famous Ernest
Mm.
Hemingway line, the world breaks everyone, and afterwards many are stronger at the broken places. But the research says it's really many. Like most of us, something bad
Yeah.
happens and we build off of it and grow and become, right? What are the other 6 major causes of depression? They're things like, here's the number one, lack of meaningful work. What does that actually mean under the hood? That is work that I'm not curious about, that I'm not passionate about, that is not what line my values, my purpose, that I don't have the autonomy, the freedom to pursue in the way that I want to, that doesn't afford me the opportunity for mastery, right? I'm not getting better at the things that matter to me. And to boot, it doesn't produce flow. All the other major causes of anxiety and depression, which are now at epidemic levels, are the same thing. We are built to go big. Not going big is bad for us. And it's a crazy thought, but it seems very, very, very true.
Yes, I'm just love everything that I'm literally taking copious notes right now because I mean I know you write this in the book, but I'm just listening to you say this in such simplistic terms, especially when it comes to our motivation. Like, yeah, it seems so obvious. Like, oh, of course.
People screw it. So I always say, I have in the work that we do, and we train everybody, right? I mean, we start with like the US Special Forces through Fortune 100 companies and Olympic athletes and professional athletes to like soccer moms from Indiana and insurance brokers from Detroit, right? Like we train everybody. And we train about 1,000 people a month. So we learn a lot along the way is the point. We start with the science and then we have these huge data sets, which is fairly useful. One thing I always tell, just as a general rule about the simplicity, I always tell my friends, this is something I learned as a journalist. Because as a journalist, one of the things you have to do is you have to, when is somebody lying? And it's really important, right? You don't want to, it's so easy to get sucked into, when you're doing cutting edge work, you get sucked into a world, you can get
Mm.
led down a rabbit hole for 6 months before you're like, oh shit, I'm being lied to. This is all crap, right? Is if it takes somebody a lot of really fancy words to explain something, they're lying flat out. Like it's just a rule I live by. I I speak pretty much every scientific language you can speak. There are some that are complicated, but the smartest people in the world who I've met, they all sound sort of one version like this. They don't sound the way, they don't sound all that much different is the first thing. But this more important thing, I think that the hardest part about the work that I do is that the tools that I lean on are psychological and physiological, and they're not sexy. I like to say that
Mm.
nothing I do, if you talk about it at a bar on Friday night, is going to get you laid. It's just not. It really won't. Like, it's not a whiz bang new technology. It's not a cool substance. It's the challenge skills balance. Yeah, I wasn't paying enough attention to the task at hand, so I'm making the task a little more difficult. I'm turning up, right? I mean, like, really? Oh, excellent. Yeah,
Yeah.
next, right? Like, it's
Yeah.
not sexy. And it seems so goddamn simple that, but our biology, we evolved millions of years ago in a very different environment. That's the systems we're running in the modern world. So optimizing that system, of course, it needs very sort of simple psychological.
Just a little technical difficulty there, but you were on one and I just wanted to let you continue to go. It was so
I'm
good.
done. I'm done.
One
Please
of the
just
things,
put a quarter in me. I'll just
yeah.
vibrate.
So good. One of the things that you said earlier about when you were talking about laying the foundation and then the grit comes, so would you say that these motivations are part of that foundation before the grit comes
Yeah,
in?
exactly. Yeah,
Oh,
exactly. And the
so
reason
good.
is it's just this. Like, you're gonna get your ass. Grit is remarkably easy to train. Like, this is the thing that people don't get about themselves is you are so much more perseverant than you know. It just has to be trained. Like, you have to start physically. Literally, you want to be grittier, it's in the gym. And you start, it's very slow. If you're doing 3 sets of 10, you're gonna do 2 sets of 10 and 1 set of 11, right? You just like want to, I'm a little grittier, I'm a little grittier, I'm a little grittier. And one of the interesting things about grit, this is going to resonate. Most people don't know this, and it's important, I guess, is when you're training these skills, even overcoming fear, all that stuff, there's two levels of training. There's I got to do the thing. So I got to show up at the gym and do the goddamn extra exercise or extra set or whatever. But then you have to notice that you're doing it consistently over time, because you have to convince your brain that you're actually grittier before you're grittier. And
Mm,
it's not enough just to go out and actually do the gritty thing. You have to remember to notice that you're doing it so you can start to trust that, oh, this is me. And right. And then the next level of grit, which is sort of where I think you spend a little bit of your time, is the grit to control your thoughts. And this is really where you start getting into mindfulness training, right? So that's where I layer. This is about where I start to layer in mindfulness training. It trains up focus, but it trains up emotional regulation, but it also, you get a little distance from your thoughts. And as you know, it is hard in this world. And if you don't get control of your brain is going to control of you. It's going to win, right? You won't,
yeah.
you're not stronger. Like
Yeah.
it's just going to win. So you got to sort of get control of it. And, it goes from there, but you want all of those intrinsic motivators pointed in the same direction, because when you have to deal with grit or when you have to confront fear, it's one thing if you're just doing it to get paid. It's
Mm,
another thing if you're doing it because, oh my God, this is I'm on mission, right?
yeah.
And then it's a totally different thing. And then it's not this horrible freaking thing I have to do. It's this challenge I want to rise to because it's going to make me better, and all that stuff. And it just,
Yeah.
the whole point of all this, the whole point of peak performance is the other thing is, you said you imagine a male athlete, and you probably imagine him when anybody says peak performance, most people hear grit. They
Mm,
hear grit. They don't, that's what they think about. They think hard work, grit, hard work. And I'm not saying it isn't massive amounts of hard work and grit isn't required. But the whole point of getting your biology to work for you rather than against you is you get farther faster with far less energy, right? When you're curious about something, you don't have to work so hard to pay attention. When you're passionate about something, right? When all these motivators are lined up, you get all of the body's reward chemicals. If you get this whole stack right, it's dopamine, norepinephrine, serotonin, anandamide, oxytocin. I mean, these are huge pleasure drugs, endorphins. These are huge pleasure drugs. And then when you're training grit, because you've got huge pleasure drugs, you're high as fuck. It's not as hard. Come on.
You're 100% right. And I'm just thinking, I'm like, wow, it really has to all come into alignment. And I'm thinking about, there's so many questions I have, but the first thing that came to my mind as you were saying that, I'm like, wow, all the false advertising that's out there is what drives me insane. It's like, oh, this can happen quickly, and it's the instant gratification, and it's only going to take a day to make this happen. Like, can you
So it's,
speak?
by the way, yeah. So this is a real problem with flow work, because
Yes.
so when in flow, this is what there are dangers that come with working with altered states of consciousness. It's not a freebie, right? And one of the dangers that happens in flow is, for a bunch of neurobiological reasons, basically because your prefrontal cortex is deactivated, time is gone, right? Flow takes place in the eternal present, the deep now. Your prefrontal cortex calculates time, and as it turns off, you lose the ability to separate past from present from future, and you're plunged into what researchers call the deep now, right? The eternal present. And the problem is, intuition is very high in flow. We see farther into the future, more clearly into the future. But a composer can get into flow and see an entire symphony, and in their head, or I can see an entire book and it feels like, oh, wow, that's going to take a week to write. And you drop out of flow, right? And it's like it's 10 years out or 5 years out and you're screwed. This is, by the way, the same mechanism that creates apocalyptic fervor and Jerusalem syndrome, which is this: people go to they go to Israel and they have Jerusalem, like they get overwhelmed, and it's like an altered state imposed by like the biblical history, basically, and they suddenly think they're Jesus or Moses, or and they start having apocalyptic predictions, and they're absolutely certain it's going to happen right here, right now, because there's no past, present, and future. It's all collapsed. So when you are doing a lot of flow work, you have to realize that like things that feel like they're just right outside your grasp, seen, experienced in flow, can literally take years and years and years. And that's, if you don't know that, it's massively demotivating, right? If you do know that, you don't take it seriously when you're in flow. You're like, yeah, it looks like I get done by next week, but I know better, even in this altered state, and it doesn't crush your soul, but it crushes a lot of people's soul. And you see this, not a huge fan of the Burning Man community, but like, people come back from Burning Man and they've got all kinds of crazy talk about what they're going to accomplish in the next month of their life. And you're like, absolutely. I'll see it in about 5 years. And by the way, shut the fuck up.
Yeah. Oh, I see it. All the time.
Yeah.
People are like, oh, I went into this dimension and now I want to do this thing. And it's just like, great. Like
You did drugs in the desert, people. You did drugs in the desert. That's fine. I'm a big fan of drugs. We all need a vacation every now and again, but let's not,
Yeah. And look, I definitely come from a place of I enjoy it's so weird. It's like I love the instant gratification. Who fucking doesn't? But I'm also, to me, I like to do the hard work. I'm into the grit. Like I want to
Flow
earn
is
it.
what redeems the hard work, right? Flow is
Yeah.
the ultimate instant gratification pleasure fix, right? I mean, one of the things about the action adventure sport athletes that caught my attention early on is there are 3 traditional paths to mastery, right? You learn to delay gratification, right? That's one of the core things. And you have great parenting, you have good mothers and good early childhood environments. And you put in 10,000 hours of deliberate practice, right? Like mothers, musicians, and marshmallows are the monikers, right? That lead to successful adults, because the marshmallow experiment is Walter Mischel's experiment in delayed gratification. The kids who could resist eating the marshmallow,
That's right.
right?
That's right. That's
so
right.
leads to all kinds of later performance. And the action sport athletes I worked with, I mean, first of all, they had horrible childhoods. So none of them had good mothers. Like forget that, right? Deliberate structured practice. These were action sport athletes. They went surfing, they went skiing, they went rock climbing. There was nothing deliberate or structured about the way they practiced. And these are like devotees of the Stoic. These are like, they don't delay gratification. Action sports are all about absolute immediate gratification. And yet they still manage to do what very few people have done. And it's because flow can amplify performance so much. And they found ways to really drop into flow, that shortcut of the whole path to mastery. And it sort of redeems those other kind of faults and qualities. But you can't have grit without flow is misery, like flat out. You can't have it. Like, it's technically grit without flow is burnout. That, right? It is actually, right. Grit with flow is wonderful, but grit without flow, you're just gonna, it doesn't. You can't last long. Nobody can.
What a great I literally want to just continue to have this conversation. I feel like I can talk to you for hours and hours and hours. And I have so many questions that I didn't even get to ask you any of these. So that's just going to be what it's going to be. And the people that are watching this and listening to this are just going to have to pick up one of your many books or your latest book called The Art of Impossible. I'm so grateful for you. I do have one final question, but before we wrap up, where can people go for more information?
For sure. StephenKotler.com is more information about me. If you're interested in the flow work, it's the flowresearchcollective.com. Present for your listeners. If you go to flowblocker.com, there are 6 major things that stand between most people and more flow. We built a diagnostic, and it'll just break it down for you. Here's what you're doing wrong. Here's how you do it right. So www.flowblocker.com. And here's another one, because we talked about curiosity into passion, passion into purpose. We took that and turned that into the passion recipe. It's an interactive, it's in The Art of Impossible. If you really want all the details, check out the new book. You can get it on Amazon, you can get it anywhere. But passionrecipe.com is it's a interactive worksheet and I think like an hour-long lecture on kind of how you do this, because everybody can learn to cultivate all your intrinsic motivators. It takes a little while. And one thing to do if you're going to run the passion recipe, last thing I'm going to say, and then you can ask your final question, do it slowly. You do not want to be 2 years into your passion to discover it was only a phase, right? Today's like massively impatient. I want it now. Gimme, gimme, gimme. Cool, but it's not going to work well here, and it's going to fuck you up later. Seriously, like, do you know how demotivating it is to be like, you're on a dig in Egypt and you're suddenly like, oh, wow, I don't really want to be an anthropologist and I'm here for the next 2 years. Fuck, right? That's not a good situation. You don't. So do it slowly. The system is designed passion is designed to be cultivated over time. And if you treat it that way, it won't betray you.
Oh, that's so good. It reminds me, there's a poem by Mark Nepo. I don't know if you're familiar with Mark Nepo's work. He's a poet, teacher. He's written several New York Times you guys are in the New York Times bestseller list family.
Okay.
And he writes this beautiful
I've got a lot
poem.
of strange cousins.
Totally.
All I gotta say.
And he writes about how hurried forgets and slowness remembers. And so
yeah, it's funny, we say it in peak performance. This is true in a handful of spots here for sure. You have to go slow to go fast. The amplification you get from flow, it's a 500% boost in productivity according to some studies. I mean, that's huge. That's stratospheric. So if the things that you do to cultivate those states take a little while, who cares? Like, seriously, who cares? You're going to go so much farther, so much faster. So anyways, what was your last question?
Oh, here we go. So the whole purpose of why I created this podcast was this idea that we are radically loved by universe, source, whatever, higher power, energy, whatever you believe, right? The whole idea is that the universe works for us and not against us. And so the final question to you is, how do you feel radically loved?
You are going to hate my answer. So I have a number of answers, but I will tell you that I am, let's just say that I like to say that I'm on the spectrum. My spectrum starts at like OCD. I go through CIA and I go to LSD, right? That's my spectrum. But I have, so like my fast answer is, well, if you put a shit ton of MDMA in my system, I feel radically loved. So, I mean, there's one. Sometimes when I'm hanging out with my dogs, I feel radically loved. And this is going to sound really strange, but if you know my work at all, I'm often a guy who likes to go skiing. I like to ski really fast by myself, alone through the trees, blasting Wu-Tang Clan usually. And when that's working, I mean, nobody's gonna find, like, when it goes wrong, they're never gonna freaking find my body, right? I will say it's like those kinds of areas, but like in that zone, that's when I have that. If you want to find a place of like universal connection and like kind of radical love, that's what it is. So I call it ghost dog mode. It's probably not healthy. It's probably not going to end well, but
that has to be probably one of
the most
best
ridiculous answers you've gotten to that particular question.
ever.
I'm glad I've been entertaining.
368 episodes in, and that definitely has to be one of the best answers. Just the sort of the spectrum of first this and then this. This is like two very extreme, and honestly, from probably the most radical person, dude that I know. I wouldn't expect anything less. I mean, what great answers.
I just wanted to tell you the truth. I don't like
Thank you.
I mean, you know
I
my work. You
appreciate it.
know I'm not
Yes.
particularly spiritual.
Hey,
You know
I
I'm a
know.
hard science guy.
I get it.
And uh
I get it.
and it doesn't mean that I'm not spiritual. I'm agnostic. I literally
Yes.
like I'm very comfortable not knowing.
Yes.
I like the mystery. I like not knowing. I'm really good with that.
Yeah, I've spent 18 years of my life with my partner who is exactly the same. So this is very familiar territory for me. So, there you have it.
Good
I
for
am I am so grateful. I mean, I'm so grateful. I can't tell you how grateful I am that you've agreed to be on the show and that you have shared your wisdom, your knowledge, your experience. Like I said, you're definitely somebody that I look up to. Your work has been incredibly impactful, and I look forward to staying connected and to having you on again in the future.
I would love to come back. And thank you for saying all that. It was very sweet, and you're making me blush, um, which is never a good look for me.
For everybody watching this or listening to this, I hope you enjoyed this episode. All of the links to get in contact with Stephen, his personal email. No, I'm just kidding. All of the links to his
How long you want to live?
how to all of his information, including the flow blocker and the
Passion
other
recipe.
passionrecipe.com. So we'll put all of those links in the show notes. If you're watching this, it'll be in the description. If you're listening to this, hit the info button. All of those links will be there. So be sure to check those out and to share this with somebody who you think would benefit from listening to the show. Thank you all so much for being here. We love you. We appreciate you. And we look forward to seeing you guys next week.